My friends, we often imagine that those called to higher purposes stand upon mountain peaks of purity, gazing serenely upon the valleys below. Yet the truth is far more sobering. Those who are called the chosen ones, as some would say, do not escape the shadows. Indeed, they often wrestle more fiercely within them. Among these shadows, none is more subtle or persistent than lust. Lust has always been the most convincing counterfeit the enemy has ever forged. It wears the colors of love, speaks the language of affection, and mimics the gestures of intimacy so convincingly that many mistake its mask for the face of something holy. Its deceit lies not in what it offers, but in what it promises. Love by its nature gives. Lust by its nature grasps. Love pours itself out to another for the other's sake. Lust reaches out not to give, but to seize, to possess, to devour. And yet, the difference between the two, though vast as heaven and hell, is often veiled in the subtlest of silks. The chosen soul is especially vulnerable to this deception, for such a soul is made acutely aware of the beauty that undergirds creation. The very eyes that are opened to behold divine splendor are also those most likely to be dazzled by its lesser reflections. Beauty, after all, is a dangerous thing when the heart is unanchored. It is meant to be a window through which we see the Creator, but lust turns it into a mirror that reflects only the self. The enemy knows this well. He tempts not with ugliness, but with beauty corrupted just enough to turn our gaze inward. Where love says, "You first," lust whispers, "Me first." Love rejoices in the freedom of the beloved, even when that freedom leads away from itself. Lust resents freedom. It would rather imprison the object of its desire than risk losing possession. Love seeks the eternal good of the other. Lust seeks the momentary pleasure of the self. The tragedy of lust is not that it loves too much, but that it loves too little. It mistakes intensity for intimacy, hunger for affection, and thrill for union. In doing so, it robs the soul of what it most deeply craves, the joy of self-forgetful communion. The chosen ones, those marked by a calling or a purpose beyond themselves, often find that their hearts are more expansive than most. They were made to love greatly, to pour out their lives in the service of the good, the true, and the beautiful. Yet this very capacity for deep affection becomes a gateway for distortion. When genuine love is delayed, or when divine affection seems distant, lust presents itself as an urgent substitute. It claims to satisfy the ache of loneliness, to fill the hollow places where love has not yet bloomed. It is a counterfeit coin struck with the same image but without the gold. The soul accepts it not out of rebellion, but often out of starvation. Lust's success lies in its half-truths. It acknowledges the goodness of desire, but twists its direction. Desire itself is not evil. It is the pulse of the heart reaching toward what it was made for. Yet when desire becomes detached from its divine object, it begins to circle upon itself, feeding endlessly on its own hunger. What once reached upward in worship now curves inward in consumption. The chosen one feels this distortion with greater pain than most, for their conscience is alive and unwilling to be deceived for long. But in the brief interval of blindness, lust can do great damage. It can teach the soul to crave shadows as though they were light. The counterfeit of love also thrives on immediacy. Love waits, lust rushes. Love endures through absence. Lust demands presence at any cost. Love deepens through patience. Lust shrivels when denied. This impatience is its most telling mark. The chosen one, accustomed to waiting on divine timing, finds the waiting room of holiness a lonely place. The silence of God becomes unbearable, and the enemy exploits that silence by offering something, anything, that feels like connection. But what feels like warmth is only friction. What seems like intimacy is only invasion. There is a peculiar cruelty in this deceit. Lust borrows the very language of love to disguise its theft. It uses tenderness to conceal selfishness, passion to justify indulgence, and vulnerability to mask domination. It is not content merely to tempt, it must also mock. Every counterfeit mocks the thing it imitates. Thus, lust's ultimate aim is not only to satisfy the body for a moment, but to cheapen the soul's understanding of what love truly is. It leaves the heart not filled but famished, not healed but hollow, not joined but divided against itself. There is a peculiar irony in the spiritual life. Those who are most attuned to the whispers of heaven are often the most deeply disturbed by the murmurs of earth. Sensitivity, which is among the greatest gifts of the soul, is also among its greatest burdens. It sharpens perception, but it also magnifies temptation. The one who feels beauty more keenly, who sees meaning behind every gesture and glory in every living form, is also the one who most easily feels the sting of desire. The chosen ones, those marked by unusual awareness of the divine, often find that their very depth of perception becomes both a doorway to holiness and a battlefield for lust. To be sensitive is to live with open nerves. It means the heart does not merely notice, it absorbs. The eyes do not simply look, they receive impressions that sink into the marrow. The imagination, that bright servant of the mind, begins to paint its own interpretations of what the senses deliver. And herein lies the peril. The same imagination that can apprehend the music of angels can also invent the whispers of passion. The same inner vision that can contemplate the beauty of creation as a hymn to its maker can twist that beauty into fuel for hunger. The more alive the heart, the more alive its appetites, the greater the capacity for divine love, the deeper the vulnerability to corrupted affection. Chosen soul's struggle is therefore not born of moral weakness, but of spiritual vitality. One cannot be deeply moved by truth without also being deeply moved by pleasure. Both enter through the same doors. The poet and the saint are kindred spirits in this respect. Each feels too much. The saint tries to transfigure feeling into worship, while the poet, unless he is guarded, may drown in it. And so the one who is called to live close to the eternal must continually battle the pull of the temporal. It is not that they love beauty too much. It is that they love it too easily, forgetting that beauty was never meant to end in itself, but to point beyond itself. The enemy exploits this unguarded sensitivity with exquisite precision. He does not need to twist the chosen one's soul far from its course. Only slightly, a small deviation in a telescope produces a vast distance between stars. The enemy knows that a sensitive heart longing for divine intimacy will not be seduced by ugliness, but by the faint echo of something holy. He therefore coats temptation in a sheen of tenderness. What begins as admiration becomes adoration. What begins as appreciation of beauty turns into desire to possess. The transition is so subtle that the soul does not notice when reverence becomes appetite. And yet, sensitivity was never meant to be extinguished. It was meant to be disciplined. The chosen one cannot numb their senses without numbing their calling. The challenge is not to feel less, but to feel rightly. Lust thrives when sensitivity is separated from sanctity. When emotion runs ungoverned, when imagination strays without direction. The chosen soul must therefore learn to shepherd its senses, to remind them that not every fragrance must be inhaled deeply, not every glimmer must be grasped, not every beauty must be owned. This burden is compounded by the fact that sensitivity makes loneliness more acute. The one who feels more feels absence more. The silence of love becomes unbearable. The emptiness of waiting grows sharp as pain. In that ache, lust presents itself not as rebellion, but as relief. It comes clothed in warmth and understanding, pretending to heal the wound it secretly deepens. It suggests that to feel is to live, that to deny feeling is to die a little. The sensitive soul, weary of restraint, yields not because it despises goodness, but because it longs for nearness. It mistakes the heat of passion for the light of presence. The burden of sensitivity, then, is that the same heart which trembles at the beauty of holiness also trembles at the beauty of flesh. The same eyes that discern eternity in a star can find themselves captive to the gleam of a passing form. The same mind that contemplates divine mystery can be ensnared by the mystery of another's touch. Sensitivity, left unguarded, becomes a storm that sweeps through the soul, uprooting even the firmest intentions, carrying the chosen one where they never meant to go, yet by winds that feel though they were heaven sent. To be chosen is to be set apart, and to be set apart is to be alone. It is one of the quiet cruelties of divine calling that it demands solitude as its companion. The chosen soul does not walk the crowded road. It is led into deserts where conversation is rare and echoes replace applause. Others may share in the outer tasks of life, but few can understand the inner weight of a destiny born in secret. The world often mistakes that loneliness for pride or peculiarity, but it is neither. It is the natural cost of being tuned to a frequency few can hear. The chosen live with a sense of nearness to something unseen, and because of that, they are often far from those who see only what is visible. This isolation is not merely circumstantial, it is spiritual. It is not simply that the chosen have fewer friends, but that they inhabit a deeper silence between every conversation. There is a hidden country within them, where few are permitted entry. Even the warmest fellowship can leave them feeling misunderstood, for the language of calling is written in a dialect not taught by any school. They carry questions too large for common talk, and yearnings that ordinary pleasures cannot satisfy. Such souls live, as it were, between two worlds, too earthly to rest in heaven, too heavenly to find home on earth. And in that space between, lust waits like a patient guest. It offers what seems to be relief from the ache of aloneness. Where the divine seems silent, it speaks quickly. Where friendship feels thin, it promises closeness. Where love delays, it presents immediacy. Its voice is soft, never commanding, merely suggestive. It says, you deserve to feel something. And for the lonely heart, that can sound almost like truth. The chosen one, weary from long vigils of faith, is tempted to mistake any nearness for comfort, any touch for communion. Lust, in this sense, is not always brazen or violent. It often comes cloaked in compassion, in the guise of solace. It pretends to understand the secret ache of being unseen, unheard, untouched. It does not ridicule the spiritual life, it merely offers to make it bearable. The chosen soul, longing for connection, may open the door without realizing who has knocked. For in the absence of human intimacy, the body itself begins to hunger as though it could replace the companionship the spirit lacks. Desire becomes a substitute for dialogue. Pleasure stands in for presence. The enemy is subtle in his timing. He does not tempt most fiercely in the hours of joy, but in the stretches of silence between revelation and fulfillment. When prayers seem unanswered, when divine purpose feels suspended, when solitude begins to echo louder than faith, he whispers that touch is better than trust, that warmth is worth more than waiting. And because the chosen are trained to listen for voices beyond the ordinary, they are sometimes slow to discern that this one does not come from heaven. There is a peculiar vulnerability in those who are set apart. They often live with a sense of incompletion. Their work, their relationships, Even their rest feels provisional, as though everything they touch belongs to a larger story not yet finished. That incompletion can become unbearable when left unacknowledged. Lust offers an illusion of wholeness, a counterfeit completion that lasts only as long as the act. It tells the lonely soul, you are not alone anymore, even as it deepens the very emptiness it claims to fill. The isolation of the called is also intensified by misunderstanding. Those around them may admire their gifts but rarely comprehend their burdens. The chosen are praised for their strength, while privately collapsing under its weight. People look to them for wisdom, for purity, for steadiness. Few think to ask how they are enduring the silence of their own nights. The expectation to be exemplary becomes its own prison, where every weakness must be hidden and every longing disguised. And so lust, always opportunistic, enters not through rebellion but through exhaustion. It tempts the chosen one to seek in secret what they cannot seek in public. It whispers that one stolen moment of intimacy will not tarnish a lifetime of virtue, that secrecy sanctifies what the world forbids. The solitude of divine calling often breeds an ache that words cannot name. It is the ache of one who hears distant music but cannot yet join the song. In that ache, the mind begins to imagine closeness, the heart begins to fabricate presence. The imagination, left untethered, creates companions out of shadows and caresses out of dreams. The chosen one, surrounded by invisible realities, begins to crave something tangible, something that can be seen, touched, held. It is not rebellion against God that drives them toward lust, but the unbearable need to feel something real in a world that often feels unreal. The danger, therefore, is not merely moral, but existential. Isolation bends the soul toward any warmth, even false warmth. The chosen one begins to confuse nearness with love, and relief with restoration. The heart grows weary of waiting for a voice that speaks rarely, and the body becomes the loudest voice in the room. In such moments, the chosen are not tempted because they are wicked, but because they are human fragile creatures bearing divine fire, walking alone through the dark corridors between calling and consummation, longing for someone who will simply walk beside them, even if that someone is only an illusion. Imagination is among the highest faculties of the soul. It is the lamp by which we perceive the invisible, the bridge between what is and what could be. Through imagination, the finite mind rehearses eternity, glimpsing patterns of truth that reason alone cannot grasp. It is through imagination that we love the unseen God, hope for a world we have not yet entered, and perceive the meaning within beauty. It was given to humanity as a means of ascent, to draw the mind upward toward wonder, toward reverence, toward worship. Yet, like every other gift once torn from its rightful order, it becomes the very tool of downfall. No other faculty, when corrupted, produces such vivid chains. The same power that can paint visions of paradise can just as easily project phantoms of desire. The corruption of imagination is subtle because it begins in the same soil as sanctity. The chosen ones, those whose minds burn with inner light, are most vulnerable to this distortion. Their imaginations are powerful enough to build worlds, and because of that, they can also build prisons. Lust does not first conquer the body, it conquers the imagination. It does not begin with an act, but with an image allowed to linger, to repeat, to grow roots in the hidden theater of thought. Once imagination becomes infected, the battle is fought not on earth, but in the unseen chambers of the mind. For imagination, unlike appetite, does not tire. The body may rest, but imagination does not sleep. It replays, recreates, refines. It can turn a fleeting glance into an endless story, a moment of beauty into a lifelong obsession. It is here that lust finds its sanctuary, crafting elaborate illusions that seem harmless at first, even noble. The imagination will claim it is merely appreciating beauty, merely celebrating what God has made, but underneath that disguise it has begun to worship the image rather than the Creator. An idolatry, once it enters through the imagination, rarely announces itself. It wears the vestments of admiration until the soul kneels without knowing it has bowed. The chosen soul's imagination is particularly potent because it was meant for vision. Such a mind does not merely see, it beholds. It turns moments into meaning, gestures into metaphors, and faces into symbols of the eternal. But what was designed to perceive the sacred can easily mistake the sensual for the spiritual. The eyes of imagination, meant to see holiness in all things, can begin to sanctify even temptation. A single thought, perhaps no larger than a spark, can be fanned into a flame of fascination. The chosen one does not sin at once. They muse first, and their musings become myths that feel more real than truth. The enemy understands the imagination's appetite for narrative. He does not tempt the chosen soul with raw appetite. He offers storylines. He invites them to rewrite the script of their loneliness into a romantic tragedy, to frame their weakness as destiny, to see desire not as temptation, but as divine calling misunderstood by others. Imagination, once corrupted, will even justify sin through poetry. It will compose elegies for its own disobedience, adorning rebellion with the fragrance of meaning. It will call lust longing, obsession passion, and bondage beauty. It will baptize fantasy in emotion until it feels sanctified. The corruption deepens when imagination begins to separate from the real. It was created to enrich reality, not to replace it. But when reality becomes difficult, when holiness feels hard, when obedience feels empty, the imagination steps in to offer an easier world. A world where affection is instant, love is without labor, and desire meets no resistance. In this private world, the chosen soul becomes both author and actor, composing scenes that obey their will. There they are adored without risk, desired without rejection, satisfied without sacrifice. But such satisfaction is hollow. It is nourishment made of shadows. The soul leaves that imagined feast more famished than before, yet more unwilling to return to truth. Imagination's corruption also lies in its power to repeat what should pass. Memory is content to recall. Imagination insists on reliving. It can take a single failure and replay it endlessly, not as remorse but as recreation. Each rehearsal deepens the groove, until the mind no longer distinguishes between what has been done and what is merely dreamed. Sin committed in the imagination can stain as deeply as sin enacted in flesh, for both spring from the same hunger, the desire to own what should only be adored. The chosen ones, endowed with vivid mental worlds, are especially ensnared because their imaginative life is richer, more persuasive, more emotionally charged. Their inner visions have color, depth, and scent. They feel real because they are nearly real. To such a soul, imagination can become a second reality, one that feels safer, more beautiful, and more responsive than the outer world. And when the outer world feels cold, the inner one becomes a refuge. Lust thus finds its altar within imagination and demands worship in secrecy. No one else sees the sacrifice being made there. No one hears the hymns sung in private thought. The soul may continue to preach virtue with its lips, while its mind burns with images that have dethroned purity. This corruption extends beyond moral failure. It affects the very structure of perception. When imagination becomes enslaved to lust, the eyes of the soul can no longer see rightly. Every form becomes suggestive, every gesture becomes charged. The world, once a cathedral of meaning, becomes a marketplace of bodies. The imagination that once adorned the sacred now adorns the profane. Beauty itself becomes dangerous because the mind no longer beholds, it consumes. The chosen one's tragedy is that they cannot simply close their eyes. To close the eyes of imagination is to extinguish the very lamp by which they were meant to see. The task of guarding imagination, therefore, is not merely one of moral vigilance, but of spiritual stewardship. For imagination, once corrupted, does not only distort desire, it reshapes the world to fit that distortion. The chosen soul walks through a creation no longer radiant with holiness, but tinted by fantasy, haunted by scenes that never happened yet feel truer than life. The imagination, meant to be a window to heaven, becomes a mirror reflecting only the self. And once the self becomes the center of every image, even the most beautiful vision can lead the soul into darkness. There is a war being fought within every human breast, a quiet and ceaseless conflict whose sounds are often drowned beneath the noise of daily life. It is the war between the flesh and the spirit, between what we are by nature and what we are called to become by grace. This war is not fought on distant fields, but in the secret places of thought, in the silent negotiations of desire, in the darkened moments when one must choose between comfort and conscience. It is the most ancient of battles, older than nations and unending until the final dawn. Every chosen soul feels its pull with particular intensity, for to be chosen is to be enlisted. The flesh and the spirit are not enemies by design. The flesh was once a loyal servant of the soul, a vessel through which divine joy could flow into the world. It was meant to express love, not to counterfeit it, to magnify the Creator, not to replace him. Yet something fractured in that harmony, and now the two are at odds. The spirit remembers heaven while the flesh craves earth. The spirit longs for eternity, the flesh clings to the immediate. Between these two loyalties, the chosen one stands, torn between hunger and holiness, between what is felt and what is known. Lust is the battlefield where this war becomes visible. It is not merely a moral lapse, but the manifestation of a cosmic tension. The spirit yearns for communion, for self-giving love, for the peace of being known without shame. The flesh, impatient and hungry, seeks a shortcut, a counterfeit intimacy that demands nothing of the soul, but promises everything to the senses. The chosen one, possessing both a heightened capacity for love and a sharpened awareness of purity, finds themselves stretched between two absolutes, the yearning to rise and the gravity that pulls them down. This war is not fought once but daily. Each morning the combatants take their places, and each night one side retreats, sometimes in victory, often in truce. There is no permanent peace, for the spirit cannot kill the flesh without killing itself, and the flesh cannot rule the spirit without destroying the soul. The chosen one, therefore, must live in tension, learning not to escape the war but to fight it with wisdom. The enemy would prefer they never realize this, that they imagine holiness means the absence of struggle. He delights in their despair when they discover the conflict still rages long after conversion, long after prayer, long after tears. Yet struggle is the proof of life, only the living wrestle. The corpse feels no conflict. The flesh speaks in the language of immediacy. It argues that feeling is reality, that hunger is proof of need, that to deny desire is to deny life itself. It whispers that peace can be purchased cheaply if one will only silence the spirit for a moment. The spirit, quieter but firmer, speaks of patience, of trust, of joy not yet born. It does not promise ease, it promises meaning. The chosen one hears both voices, and the torment lies not in ignorance but in recognition. They know the better voice but crave the louder one. There are moments when the flesh wins not through passion but through weariness. The chosen grow tired of vigilance, tired of waiting, tired of being good. The Spirit calls them to endurance, but endurance is cold comfort to a lonely heart. The body, on the other hand, offers warmth, touch, immediacy, the illusion of being seen and known. The temptation of lust is rarely rooted in malice, it is rooted in fatigue. The chosen one falls not because they hate the good, but because they are too tired to keep reaching for it. And the enemy, patient and practiced, knows that exhaustion is his sharpest weapon. The war is complicated by memory. Each defeat leaves a residue of shame that the enemy quickly fashions into a second weapon. Shame turns the soul inward, away from the battlefield, away from the light. It convinces the chosen one that they are unfit for the fight, that the Spirit has abandoned them, that the flesh is all that remains. Yet even as they despair, the battle continues beneath the despair. The Spirit, wounded but unyielding, refuses surrender. It waits, silently urging repentance not as punishment but as renewal. For repentance is not retreat, it is regrouping. It is the moment the soldier remembers whose banner they fight under. Lust's deception lies in its simplicity. It does not ask the soul to renounce heaven, only to delay it. It does not demand atheism, only postponement. It whispers just once more, and then you will return to holiness. But each once more becomes another chain. The chosen one, aware of the deceit yet seduced by its comfort, learns the hardest lesson of war, that the enemy within often speaks with the most reasonable voice. The flesh, when indulged, grows louder. When resisted, it grows cunning. It will disguise itself as affection, as artistry, as the pursuit of beauty or the appreciation of form. It will quote virtue to justify vice, claiming that what is admired cannot be sinful. The Spirit, discerning yet gentle, reminds the soul that beauty was never meant to be consumed, only contemplated. But contemplation demands reverence, and reverence demands restraint. The chosen one, whose heart is trained to see the sacred in all things, must learn to look without grasping, to behold without owning. The eyes, after all, can be windows or weapons. There are nights when the war grows quiet, not because peace has been won, but because both sides rest, gathering strength. In those silences, the chosen one often feels abandoned, mistaking calm for defeat. Yet the war is not always loud. Sometimes the fiercest battles are fought in stillness, when one must choose not to imagine, not to remember, not to reach. The Spirit's greatest victories often occur in the moments when nothing seems to happen. To live in this war is to know contradiction. The chosen one can be both saint and struggler within the same hour, filled with light yet haunted by shadow. They can preach against lust in the morning and battle it by night. This duality is not hypocrisy. It is humanity stretched between two destinies. The flesh remembers Eden lost. The Spirit anticipates Eden restored. Between those gardens lies the battlefield where the chosen fight with trembling hands, torn between dust and divinity, between the hunger that drags them downward and the grace that pulls them toward the sky. Shame is one of the oldest garments worn by the human race. It was sewn together in the dim light of Eden's aftermath, stitched from leaves and fear. Since that day, humanity has never walked entirely unclothed of it. It clings even to the garments of the redeemed, hiding in folds of memory and whispering in the stillness after sin. For the chosen ones, those who walk under the weight of divine expectation, shame becomes a more cunning adversary than lust itself. Lust wounds, but shame binds. Lust tempts toward desire. Shame imprisons within disgust. Lust says, take. Shame says, you are unworthy to ask again. Between the two, the chosen soul often hangs suspended, neither sinning freely nor worshipping freely, trapped between longing and loathing. Grace, however, enters this ancient drama not as a polite visitor, but as a conqueror. It does not deny shame, it defies it. Grace does not erase the memory of failure, powerless. Shame dedans mzisen iolence what speaks. Where shame insists on hiding, grace calls by name. Yet grace's voice is not thunderous. It is tender. It does not shout the sinner down, but lifts the face bowed by guilt. The chosen soul, often weighed by higher ideals, struggles to believe that such gentleness could apply to them. They can imagine forgiveness for others, the repentant thief, the lost prodigal, but not for themselves, not for those who should have known better. Their shame is theological. It is guilt baptized in knowledge. Shame is clever in its disguises. It dresses itself in humility and calls itself repentance, but its true aim is paralysis. It does not drive one to confession, but to concealment. It whispers that to approach the light would only expose deeper darkness. The chosen, fearing hypocrisy, retreat into secrecy. They become their own judges, sentencing themselves to silence. In that silence, shame grows like ivy, creeping across the walls of the heart, covering every window that might have let in light. The soul begins to confuse secrecy with sanctity, believing that holiness must now be maintained through distance rather than restoration. Grace, however, is not deterred by locked doors. It enters through wounds. It seeps through cracks. It speaks in the tone of memory, reminding the soul not of what it has done, but of whose it is. It does not ask for explanations. It invites surrender. The chosen one often resists because surrender feels too simple. The mind demands a punishment proportional to the sin, a penance that will make forgiveness seem earned. But grace refuses such bargains. It will not be purchased. It can only be received. It does not meet merit, it creates it. The scandal of grace is that it loves even those still covered in the dust of their defeat. The war between grace and shame is not fought in the heavens, but in the imagination of the heart. Shame argues from logic, you failed, therefore you are unworthy. Grace argues from love, you are loved, therefore you are not lost. Shame remembers the act, grace remembers the intention. Shame builds walls of fear around the memory of sin. Grace walks straight through them as if they were air. The chosen soul, hearing both voices, must decide which to believe. The tragedy is that shame often sounds more truthful, because it echoes our sense of justice, while grace feels unreasonable, like sunlight shining where it should not. Yet it is precisely this unreasonableness that makes it divine. The chosen ones struggle most deeply here, for their standards are higher and their failures feel larger. They have glimpsed the holiness of God, therefore their own imperfection terrifies them. The closer they draw to light, the more vividly they see the stains on their hands. They begin to believe that grace is for beginners, that those called to great things must atone through strength, not surrender. They try to clean their own wounds with the very hands that caused them. But grace is not a ladder for the strong. It is a stretcher for the broken. It comes precisely when self-redemption has failed. Shame also exploits memory. It replays past sins in moments of worship, interrupting prayer with echoes of unworthiness. It paints every attempt at purity with suspicion, whispering that holiness is now beyond reach. The chosen soul, longing to serve, begins to shrink back, fearing that their presence itself dishonors the sacred. Thus shame achieves what lust could not. It silences the chosen voice, isolates the chosen heart, and convinces the chosen that God has grown weary of them. Grace, however, has never grown weary of anyone. It is not a mood of God, but the expression of his nature. It does not tire, because love does not calculate the number of pardons. The power of grace lies in its refusal to treat sin as the final word. It sees the failure, but also the fight, the collapse, but also the courage to rise. It looks not only at the act committed, but at the heart that wept afterward. It knows the secret griefs, the prayers whispered into pillows, the vows made in darkness, the longing to begin again. Grace is not surprised by the weakness of the chosen. It was designed for it. It is not a reluctant pardon from a disappointed judge, but the embrace of a father who already knew and still chose. Shame thrives on secrecy, but grace breathes in confession. When the chosen one dares to speak their failure aloud, not to justify, but to unveil, it loses its poisonous power. Grace works best in exposure, for it can only heal what is revealed. The light does not burn the wound, it sterilizes it. The chosen soul fears that confession will bring rejection, but grace always meets honesty with tenderness. The very thing shame warns will destroy them becomes the door through which they find peace. The wonder of grace is that it transforms even the memory of sin into the material of wisdom. What once brought shame becomes a reminder of mercy. What once humiliated becomes a hymn. The scars remain, but they no longer sting. The chosen one learns that holiness is not the absence of failure, but the continual return to grace. Even the fall, when redeemed, becomes a staircase, each step a reminder of the strength of the hand that lifted them. Grace, unlike shame, does not erase the past, it rewrites its meaning. It turns every defeat into testimony, every wound into a window, every I am unworthy into I am still loved. So then, the struggle of the chosen is not a scandal to be hidden, but a story still being written. The war with lust, with loneliness, with the imagination and the flesh, is not the mark of abandonment, but of belonging. The very intensity of the battle reveals the nobility of the soul engaged in it. Only those called to light will wrestle so fiercely with shadow. Only those fashioned for heaven will feel so restless upon the earth. We must learn, therefore, to look upon our frailties not as evidence of failure, but as the arena of transformation. The furnace does not destroy the gold, it purifies it. The thorn does not cancel the rose, it guards its fragrance. Likewise, temptation does not annul calling, it proves it. For God does not train his soldiers in gardens, but in deserts, where every thirst must be faced and every illusion stripped away. Lust, in all its disguises, teaches the chosen the poverty of substitutes. It exposes how easily we mistake intensity for intimacy, sensation for love, and longing for fulfillment. Yet through that very disillusionment the heart begins to crave the real, the love that neither corrupts nor consumes. Grace waits precisely there, beyond the exhaustion of self-effort, beyond the pride of perfection, beyond the masks of shame. It is not a rescue for the sinless, but the rebirth of the fallen, not the reward for strength, but the restoration of surrender. The chosen ones will fall, yes, but they will rise differently each time, more emptied of illusion, more filled with light. For in the end, the struggle that once seemed their curse will become their crown. What was once a battlefield will become an altar, and the very place of temptation will become the proof of redemption. And when all is finished, when flesh and spirit are reconciled, when the counterfeit has lost its power, when the last wound is healed, they will look back upon the long war with wonder. They will see that grace was not merely stronger than shame, but older, deeper, and infinitely patient. It followed them through every fall, it whispered through every silence, and it waited at every turning until the soul, weary of substitutes, turned homeward and found that love had been following all along.